Prophecy Decoded. Decoded the past, reveal the future.
They tell you prophecy is ancient history. They tell you the Bible speaks only to the past. They tell you Hebrew Israelites have no connection to modern events. But tonight, everything changes. September 23rd to 26th, 2025 is coming fast. The United Nations is hosting what they call Treaty Event 2025. Something they describe as marking 80 years of multilateral treaty making at the United Nations. Something that could reshape global governance forever. And buried in ancient texts, hidden from plain sight, lies the blueprint for what's about to unfold. You're about to discover connections that will shake everything you thought you knew. The Merneptah Stele. The Book of Jubilees. Cannabis altars in ancient Israel. Divine council structures reflected in modern governance. These aren't random archaeological finds. They're pieces of a prophetic puzzle that points directly to September 2nd, 05. The UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has called this the landmark 80th session of the United Nations General Assembly. This isn't just another diplomatic meeting. This is a convergence point where ancient prophecies and modern governance systems collide. Stay with me, because what I'm about to reveal will change how you see the world. And it starts with a forgotten covenant written in the stars. Genesis chapter 10 gives us the table of nations. Most people skip right over it. They see it as boring genealogy, a list of names that don't matter anymore. But they're wrong. Dead wrong. This isn't just a family tree. It's a divine blueprint. A roadmap for global unity that was established at the very beginning. Noah's sons Shem, Ham, and Japheth became the fathers of all nations. Every people group on earth traces back to this moment. The text says their descendants were divided according to their languages, families, and nation. But here's what most miss. The Hebrew word for divided is Arad. It means to separate for a purpose, to scatter with intention. This wasn't random. It was prophetic preparation. Archaeological evidence backs this up completely. Ugaritic tablets from ancient Canaan describe divine councils, celestial assemblies where the gods made decisions about earthly governance. The Israelites knew this pattern intimately. They understood that heaven's structure would eventually be reflected on earth. The unstructure mirrors this ancient divine council model perfectly. 5 permanent Security Council members with veto power. 10 rotating members representing regional interests. A Secretary General serving as Chief Administrative Officer. This isn't accidental. It's archetypal. DNA research reveals something stunning about your heritage. African American populations carry genetic markers that connect them directly to ancient Levantine peoples. Haplogroups C1b, 1a, and J1 tell a story of migration and connection spanning millennia. Your ancestry isn't just American. It's biblical. But here's what they don't tell you about September 2nd, 02. This isn't just the 80th anniversary of the UN. It's a prophetic milestone. The UN's 2025 treaty event runs from September 23rd to 26th. 4 days that world leaders will use to sign treaties covering human rights, environmental protection, and global cooperation. The Secretary General's invitation letter specifically mentions treaties addressing human rights, disarmament, penal matters, law of the sea, and environmental protection. These aren't separate issues. They're components of a unified global governance system that matches exactly what biblical prophets predicted. The 2024 Pact for the Future already laid the groundwork. World leaders adopted comprehensive agreements covering peace and security, sustainable development, climate change, digital cooperation, human rights, gender, youth and future generations, and the transformation of global governance. This is exactly what the Table of Nations blueprint anticipated. All peoples united under one governmental framework. All nations operating within one legal system. All tribes reconnected to their original divine mandate. Your genetic heritage carries authority in this process. The same bloodlines that established ancient Israel through divine covenant are being positioned to participate in modern global governance through international treaties. You're not just witnesses to prophecy. You're participants in its fulfillment. The Merneptah Stele changes everything about biblical chronology and modern Hebrew Israelites' identity. Found in 1896 by Flinders Petrie, this granite monument contains the earliest mention of Israel outside the Bible. Dated to 1207 BC, it proves Israel was already an established power over 3,000 years ago. But the inscription contains a phrase that haunts scholars and should inspire Hebrew Israelites today. Israel is laid waste. Bare seed. What does this mean for September 2nd, 02? Most translations focus on military defeat, but the Hebrew implies something deeper. Something prophetic about scattering and regathering. The word seed here is zera. It can mean literal seed for planting, but it also means descendants. Future generations. Pharaoh Merneptah wasn't just describing a military campaign. He was pronouncing a prophetic judgment about Israel's future diaspora that would be reversed in the end times. Here's what's remarkable about the stele's context. It groups Israel with Canaanite cities like Ashkelon and Gezer. But Israel is marked differently. The hieroglyphic determinative shows Israel as a people, not a place, a nation without fixed borders. A scattered people who would one day be regathered through international legal frameworks. DNA evidence supports this interpretation completely. The same genetic markers found in ancient Levantine populations appear throughout the African diaspora. Your heritage connects directly to these ancient Israelites. You carry their genetic memory in your very na. You inherit their prophetic destiny through biological continuity. The timing of Merneptah Stele matters for understanding 2025. If he could boast about defeating Israel in 1207 BC, Israel had to be powerful enough to matter. This wasn't a nomadic tribe just entering Canaan. This was an established nation worth mentioning in royal propaganda. The implications are staggering for modern Hebrew Israelites communities. Biblical chronology places the Exodus around 1446 BC. That gives Israel over 2 centuries to establish themselves before Merneptah's campaign. Time to build cities, develop military strength, create the kind of civilization that Egypt would notice and other nations would recognize. This connects directly to September 2nd, 025 through patterns of scattering and regathering. The same forces that scattered ancient Israel among the nations are now creating international legal frameworks for diaspora recognition. The UN's treaty system isn't just diplomatic protocol. It's prophetic mechanism. The September 2nd, 025 treaty event specifically addresses issues affecting diaspora populations. Treaties covering human rights include indigenous peoples' rights. International law increasingly recognizes genetic heritage claims. Legal frameworks that could support Hebrew Israelites' identity recognition on a global scale. But this goes beyond legal recognition. It's about prophetic timing and divine orchestration. The same God who allowed Israel to be scattered through historical processes is engineering their regathering through international governance systems. Ancient promises being fulfilled through modern mechanisms. Jordana carries legal authority in this process. International law recognizes genetic evidence for indigenous claims. Courts worldwide accept testing for heritage verification. The same genetic markers that connect you to ancient Israel could provide legal standing for treaty rights and recognition. The Book of Jubilees reveals secrets that mainstream Christianity deliberately ignores. Written in Hebrew between 135 and 105 BC, it retells Genesis and Exodus with prophetic insights that connect directly to 2025's global developments. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church preserved it when others rejected it. And Ethiopian genetic studies show direct connections to ancient Israel that validate the text's authority. Jubilees doesn't just repeat biblical stories. It reveals heavenly tablets. Divine records where God wrote history before it happened. According to Jubilees, everything unfolding on earth was predetermined, written in advance, including global governance systems that would emerge in the end times to facilitate Hebrew Israelites' restoration. Chapter 23 of Jubilees contains Moses' prophecy about the final generation that matches 2025's trajectory perfectly. It describes a time when the earth will be destroyed because of human corruption, when there will be no seed of the vine and no oil, when beasts and cattle and birds and fish will perish because of the children of men. But then comes restoration through divine intervention. Jubilees 23:26 says, "And it was written on the heavenly tablets that they would be oppressed in Egypt, and that God would bring them out with great power and wonders, so that his name would be glorified throughout all generations." The pattern is clear and repeating in 2025. Oppression followed by deliverance. Scattering followed by regathering. Judgment followed by restoration. And according to Jubilees, this cycle repeats throughout history until the final kingdom is established through international treaty systems. Here's where Jubilees get specific about global governance. The text describes a final covenant, a global agreement that will unite all nations under divine law. Chapter 15 says, "And the Lord will establish his kingdom on earth, and the righteous shall rule with him, for the law shall be written on their hearts, and administered through earthly institutions." This isn't metaphorical language. Jubilees presents this as literal future history, a time when earthly governance will reflect heavenly order, when international law will align with divine law, when the scattered tribes of Israel will be regathered from every nation through legal recognition rather than military conquest. Dana research confirms the diaspora described in Jubilees with stunning precision. Genetic studies of Ethiopian Jews show Middle Eastern ancestry. West African populations carry Levantine markers. Caribbean and American communities show genetic connections spanning continents and millennia that validate Jubilees' scattering narratives. The September 2nd, 2025 treaty framework could be the exact mechanism for this prophetic regathering. Not physically at first, but legally, structurally, creating the governmental foundation for what Jubilees calls the kingdom of the righteous administered through international institutions. The UN's 2024 Pact for the Future already established precedent for this transformation. World leaders committed to strengthen international frameworks and ensure that international institutions can deliver in the face of a world that has changed dramatically since they were created. This language matches Jubilees' prophecy exactly. Old systems being transformed, new frameworks being established, international institutions gaining authority to implement divine justice, global governance structures being prepared for Hebrew Israelites' participation and leadership. Your heritage as Hebrew Israelites isn't just historical curiosity. It's prophetic authority. The same genetic bloodlines that received the original covenant carry legal standing in modern treaty frameworks. The same spiritual inheritance that established ancient Israel provides authority for participation in global governance restoration. Ancient governance wasn't human invention. It was divine revelation implemented through earthly institutions. Psalm 82 describes God standing in the divine assembly, judging among the gods. Deuteronomy 32:8-9 explains how the Most High divided the nations according to the number of the sons of God, with Israel as his special inheritance administered through governmental structures. This celestial council pattern appears throughout ancient Near Eastern literature and connects directly to modern operations. Ugaritic tablets describe El presiding over the assembly of gods, each deity governing a specific nation or territory. Divine messengers carrying decrees between heaven and earth. A bureaucratic system that mirrors exactly what's happening in September 2nd, 2025. Archaeological evidence from Ras Shamra confirms these divine council concepts in Canaanite religion. Tablets describe Ba reporting to El about earthly affairs. Divine messengers carrying decrees between heavenly councils and earthly governments. An administrative system that provides the template for modern international organizations. The Unsecurity Council structure reflects this ancient pattern perfectly. 5 permanent members with veto power representing major governmental authorities. 10 rotating members representing regional interests. A Secretary General who serves as Chief Administrative Officer implementing decisions made by the Council. Hebrew Israelites theology recognizes these patterns because it understands divine government principles. The same God who established celestial councils also established earthly kingdoms. The same divine order that governed ancient Israel will eventually govern all nations through international treaty systems. DNA research supports this theological understanding with genetic evidence. Leadership lineages often correlate with specific haplogroups. The priestly line of Aaron carries distinctive genetic signatures. Royal lines show similar patterns across cultures and continents that validate biblical governance structures. The September 2nd, 025 treaty event represents a convergence of these governmental streams. Ancient divine council structure being implemented through modern international law. Genetic lineages reconnecting across continents through legal recognition. Prophetic timing aligning with calendar years in ways that validate biblical chronology. But here's what makes this urgent for Hebrew Israelites communities. The UN's Pact for the Future, adopted in September 2nd, already laid the legal groundwork. It covers peace and security, sustainable development, climate change, digital cooperation, human rights, and global governance transformation that creates space for diaspora recognition. The 2025 treaty event will build on this foundation with specific agreements. 80 years after the UN's founding, world leaders will sign treaties that could establish permanent global governance structures, international law that overrides national sovereignty in favor of supranational authority administered through UN systems. This is exactly what ancient prophecies predicted. A time when all nations would be united under one governmental system. When laws would be standardized across cultures and continents. When divine justice would be administered through earthly institutions that recognize Hebrew Israelites' authority. Your participation in this process isn't optional. It's prophetic destiny. You carry genetic and spiritual authority that connects directly to these unfolding events. You're not just witnesses to prophecy. You're inheritors of covenant promises being fulfilled through international legal mechanisms. African American heritage connects directly to biblical prophecy through genetic, cultural, and spiritual lineages that span continents and millennia. DNA research reveals haplogroup 1b1 throughout West African populations, with clear connections to ancient Levantine peoples. This isn't theory or wishful thinking. It's genetic fact verified by peer-reviewed scientific research. The Middle Passage wasn't just historical tragedy. It was prophetic fulfillment of Deuteronomy 28's curse descriptions. Ships carrying Israelites to lands they had never known. The curse of slavery imposed on covenant peoples. The loss of identity through forced cultural suppression. The scattering among nations that preceded restoration. But Deuteronomy 28 also promises restoration that connects directly to 2025's developments. Return from captivity through divine intervention. Recovery of identity through cultural awakening. Regathering from the ends of the earth through international legal mechanisms. The same chapter that describes judgment also guarantees deliverance through governmental changes. Ethiopian Orthodox traditions preserve Hebrew Israelites' identity through the Kebra Nagast. This text describes the Queen of Sheba's relationship with King Solomon, the transfer of the Ark of the Covenant to Ethiopia, the establishment of a royal line that continues to this day and validates African connections to biblical Israel. Archaeological evidence supports these traditions completely. Ethiopian Jewish communities maintained Hebrew practices for centuries without outside contact. Genetic studies show Middle Eastern ancestry among Ethiopian populations. Cultural practices mirror ancient Israelite customs described in biblical texts with remarkable precision. Caribbean and South American communities show similar patterns of preservation. Maroon societies preserved African traditions that connect directly to Hebrew customs. Genetic studies reveal Levantine markers throughout Caribbean populations. Cultural practices include Saturday Sabbath observance and dietary laws that survived centuries of suppression. These aren't coincidences or cultural borrowing. They're prophetic patterns preserved across generations through divine providence. The same God who scattered Israel among the nations also preserved their identity through cultural practices that survived slavery, collision, and cultural suppression because they carry spiritual authority. The 2025 Untreaty Framework creates legal mechanisms for diaspora recognition that could validate these heritage claims. International law increasingly acknowledges indigenous rights, cultural sovereignty protections, genetic heritage claims that provide legal standing for Hebrew Israelites communities worldwide. But this goes beyond legal recognition. It's about prophetic timing and divine orchestration. The regathering described in biblical prophecy requires global governmental structures that can coordinate international population movements. The UN provides exactly that framework through treaty systems and international law. September 2nd, 025 represents a convergence point for Hebrew Israelites restoration. 80 years of undevelopment creating legal frameworks. Genetic research confirming diaspora connections. Cultural awakening spreading among Hebrew Israelites communities. Prophetic timing aligning with international governance changes. Your heritage isn't just pride or cultural identity. It's legal authority and prophetic standing. Genetic authority validated by scientific research. Cultural continuity providing sovereignty claims. Spiritual continuity that supports indigenous peoples' claims under international law. The September 23-26, 2025 treaty event could provide international recognition for Hebrew Israelites communities. Treaties covering human rights include indigenous peoples' protections, international law frameworks that acknowledge genetic heritage claims, legal structures that could support Hebrew Israelites' sovereignty within global governance systems. Arad reveals secrets about ancient Israelite spiritual practices that most biblical scholars deliberately ignore. This Iron Age fortress in southern Israel contained a temple that mirrors Solomon's temple in Jerusalem architecturally. But chemical analysis of outer residues reveals something connects directly to Hebrew Israelite spiritual authority. Ancient Israelites were burning cannabis as part of their worship rituals. The smaller limestone altar contained cannabidiol and tetrahydrocannabinol mixed with animal dung. The psychoactive compounds were sufficient to alter consciousness in worshippers breathing the smoke. This wasn't recreational drug use or pagan corruption. It was deliberate spiritual practice designed to facilitate divine encounters and prophetic revelation. The larger altar contained frankincense and animal fats. These substances burn at temperatures that release aromatic compounds. The combination created a sensory environment that enhanced spiritual experiences. Smoke that carried prayers to heaven. A fragrance that invited divine presence into earthly worship spaces. Dating places this practice between 760 and 715 BC. Right during the First Temple period, when Solomon's temple was operating in Jerusalem. The architectural similarities between Tel Arad and the Jerusalem temple suggest parallel practices. Cannabis use wasn't limited to border fortresses. It was part of mainstream Hebrew worship. But here's what makes this prophetically significant for 2025. The Book of Revelation describes an angel with a golden censer, offering incense mixed with the prayers of the saints. Smoke rising before God's throne carrying human petitions to divine courts. The same spiritual technology being restored in Hebrew Israelites communities today. Ancient Israelites understood something that modern Christianity deliberately forgot. Consciousness-altering substances can facilitate spiritual encounters when used properly. Not as escape from reality, but as doorways into deeper spiritual dimensions, windows into prophetic realms that reveal divine plans for earthly governance. This connects directly to Rastafarian traditions preserved in Caribbean Hebrew Israelites communities. Ganja a spiritual sacrament rather than recreational drug. Cannabis as prayer enhancement and prophetic catalyst. Smoking rituals that connect worshippers to biblical practices their ancestors maintained through centuries of suppression. Chemical analysis proves ancient Israelites were using cannabis for religious purposes 2,700 years ago. The same plant that Rastafarians consider sacred was sacred to biblical Israelites. The same spiritual practices that colonial authorities suppressed were biblical practices that God ordained for prophetic revelation. The prophetic implications are massive for Hebrew Israelites communities today. If ancient Israelites used cannabis to receive divine revelation about governance and political events, modern Hebrew Israelites using cannabis might be accessing the same prophetic dimensions. The same spiritual technology that revealed God's plans to ancient prophets. This isn't about recreational marijuana or drug culture. It's about spiritual technology and prophetic authority. Consciousness tools that open prophetic channels when used in proper spiritual context. Substances that biblical Israelites used to receive divine intelligence about future events, including September 2nd, 025 significance. The UN's drug policies are changing in ways that could protect Hebrew Israelites' spiritual practices. International law increasingly recognizes traditional spiritual practices. Religious freedom protections that could cover Hebrew Israelites' cannabis use as sacramental rather than recreational activity. But the deeper issue is prophetic authority and spiritual inheritance. If you carry Hebrew Israelites' genetic heritage, you might also carry spiritual authority to use Hebrew Israelites' spiritual practices. Cannabis included as biblical sacrament, not as rebellion against law, but as restoration of biblical worship methods. The September 2nd, 025 treaty framework could create international protections for indigenous spiritual practices. Religious freedom guaranteed across national boundaries through treaty systems. Legal recognition for Hebrew Israelites communities and their traditional worship methods, including cannabis as spiritual sacrament. Archaeological evidence supports cannabis use in biblical worship. Chemical analysis validates ancient practices. DNA research confirms Hebrew Israelites' genetic authority. Cultural traditions preserve spiritual knowledge. Legal frameworks are being established for protection and recognition through international treaty systems. Your spiritual practices aren't just cultural preservation. They're prophetic technology. The same consciousness-altering methods that ancient Hebrew prophets used to receive divine revelation about political events and governmental changes, including revelation about September 2nd. 025's prophetic significance for global governance transformation. Ezekiel's vision of dry bones coming together represents the ultimate Hebrew Israelites prophecy connecting directly to September 2nd. 025's treaty events. Scattered bones of Israel regathering into a living nation. Dead hopes resurrecting into fulfilled promises. Ancient people restored to prophetic purpose through international legal mechanisms. But Ezekiel 37 isn't just about physical regathering to geographical Palestine. It's about governmental restoration through international recognition. Verse 22 promises, "I will make them one nation in the land, on the mountains of Israel. One king will be king over all of them, and they will never again be two nations or be divided into two kingdoms." One king. One governmental system. This is exactly what the UN's 2025 treaty framework could establish for Hebrew Israelites communities worldwide. Not Israeli nationalism or Zionist politics, but global governance under divine authority. International law that reflects biblical justice. World government that serves God's kingdom purposes. The timing is prophetic and connects to current events perfectly. Ezekiel received this vision during Babylonian exile. Israel scattered among the nations. Their temple destroyed. Their kingdom ended. Everything looked hopeless from human perspective. But God showed him future restoration that would surpass past glory. Today's Hebrew Israelites communities are experiencing similar patterns of restoration. Genetic research confirming biblical ancestry. Cultural awakening spreading globally among diaspora populations. Spiritual authority being recognized through academic research. The same pattern Ezekiel described is happening through modern mechanisms. Persian period Yehud coins prove post-exilic Israel was successfully rebuilt. Archaeological evidence shows returned exiles establishing new communities with governmental structures. Local autonomy within imperial frameworks. Self-governance rights protected by international authority systems. The 2025 treaty system could create similar structures for modern Hebrew Israelites. Communities recognized as indigenous peoples with cultural sovereignty rights. Self-governance within international law frameworks. Modern Yihud provinces established through legal recognition rather than military conquest. DINA research supports this restoration pattern with scientific precision. Genetic markers preserved through diaspora experiences across continents and centuries. Bloodlines maintained through historical suppression. The same biological inheritance that established ancient Israel is available for modern restoration through legal recognition. But restoration requires recognition through international legal frameworks. Treaties that acknowledge Hebrew Israelites' identity claims. International law that protects diaspora rights across national boundaries. Global governance systems that can coordinate regathering processes without territorial displacement of existing populations. September 2nd, 025 represents potential fulfillment of Ezekiel's prophecy through diplomatic rather than military means. Not through political revolution or territorial conquest, but through governmental evolution. Ancient promises fulfilled through modern international legal mechanisms that recognize indigenous rights. The covenant of peace described in Ezekiel 37:26 promises, "I will make a covenant of peace with them. It will be an everlasting covenant. I will establish them and increase their numbers, and I will put my sanctuary among them forever." This everlasting covenant could be established through international treaty law rather than religious ritual. Legal frameworks that guarantee Hebrew Israelites' rights in perpetuity. Global governance structures that protect restored communities across continents. Modern sanctuaries as established through legal recognition and cultural sovereignty. The UN-Secretary General's letter specifically mentions treaties that for many of these treaties, the goal of universal participation is within our collective reach. Universal participation means global recognition. International legal frameworks that include all peoples and nations in governance structures. Hebrew Israelites communities worldwide could participate in this universal system. Not as subjects or minorities, but as recognized indigenous peoples with treaty rights. Genetic heritage providing legal standing. Cultural continuity providing sovereignty claims. Spiritual authority providing governmental participation rights. Everything converges in September 2nd, 025 in ways that validate biblical prophecy. Ancient predictions reaching fulfillment deadlines. Genetic research confirming diaspora connections through scientific methods. Cultural awakenings spreading globally among Hebrew Israelites populations. International law creating recognition frameworks through treaty systems. The Table of Nations blueprint being implemented through global treaties that unite all peoples. The Merneptah Stele's ancient scattering being reversed through legal regathering mechanisms. Jubilees heavenly tablets manifesting through earthly agreements. Divine councils being reflected in international assemblies. Hebrew Israelites' heritage awakening being supported by genetic evidence and cultural research. Arad's spiritual technology being restored through religious freedom protections. Ezekiel's governmental vision being implemented through treaty frameworks rather than military conquest. This isn't random historical coincidence. It's prophetic fulfillment through divine orchestration. The same God who established ancient Israel through divine covenant is establishing global Hebrew Israelites' recognition through international treaties. The same promises given to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are being fulfilled through governance structures. But prophecy requires active participation rather than passive observation. Restoration demands community engagement with legal frameworks. Global governance needs local Hebrew Israelites' authority and leadership. International treaties require community involvement and cultural representation. The September 2nd, 025 treaty event creates unprecedented opportunities for Hebrew Israelites' recognition. 4 days of treaty signing covering human rights, indigenous peoples' protections, and global governance transformation. Yordana carries legal authority in this process. International courts recognize genetic evidence for indigenous claims. Treaty law acknowledges ancestral heritage rights. The same genetic markers that connect you to ancient Israel could provide legal standing for sovereignty claims and governmental participation. Your cultural heritage provides additional authority. Traditional practices preserved through historical suppression. languages and customs that connect to biblical patterns, spiritual knowledge that validates ancient connections, cultural continuity that supports indigenous peoples' claims under international law. Your spiritual inheritance carries prophetic authority. The same bloodlines that received original covenants, the same genetic lineages that established ancient kingdoms, the same spiritual authority that biblical prophets carried. Modern inheritance of ancient governmental mandates. September 23rd through 26, 2025 represents more than diplomatic meetings. It's the culmination of millennia-long prophetic processes. Ancient promises reaching modern fulfillment through international legal mechanisms. Biblical predictions becoming international reality through UN-governance systems. The UN's theme for the event is 80 years of multilateral treaty making at the United Nations. 80 years of legal framework development. 8 decades of international law creation. Constitutional foundations being laid for global governance that includes Hebrew Israelites' recognition and participation. But biblical numerology gives special significance to 80-year periods. Moses was 80 when he confronted Pharaoh and led Israel out of Egypt. 80 represents authority and divine timing. Governmental change implemented through divine intervention rather than human planning. The 2025 treaty event occurs exactly 80 years after the UN's founding. Prophetic timing that validates divine orchestration. International legal frameworks reaching maturity precisely when Hebrew Israelites communities are awakening to their identity and heritage. Current events are accelerating toward this prophetic convergence. Global governance systems reaching unprecedented authority. International law superseding national sovereignty. Treaty frameworks creating legal mechanisms for diaspora recognition and cultural sovereignty. DNA research providing scientific validation for Hebrew Israelites' heritage claims. Genetic evidence supporting biblical genealogies. Archaeological discoveries confirming ancient practices. Academic research validating cultural continuity across centuries of suppression. Hebrew Israelites communities worldwide are awakening to their identity and authority. Cultural movements spreading across continents. Spiritual revivals connecting modern populations to ancient practices. Legal advocacy developing for indigenous rights recognition through international frameworks. The timing isn't coincidental. It's prophetic. The same divine providence that preserved Hebrew Israelites' genetic markers through centuries of diaspora is orchestrating their recognition through modern legal systems. Ancient covenants being renewed through contemporary treaty mechanisms. Will you recognize September 2nd, 025's prophetic significance when it arrives? Will you engage with the legal frameworks being established for Hebrew Israelites' recognition? Will you participate in restoration processes that have been unfolding for millennia through divine orchestration? Will you research your genetic connections to biblical ancestry through available DNA testing? Will you explore Hebrew Israelites' cultural practices and spiritual traditions? Will you connect with communities worldwide that share this heritage and prophetic understanding? Will you prepare for governmental participation in systems that could recognize Hebrew Israelites' authority? Will you develop legal knowledge about indigenous peoples, rights under international law? Will you advocate for Hebrew Israelites' recognition through available political and legal channels? The future isn't happening to you passively. It's happening through you actively. Your DNA carrying legal authority. Your heritage providing cultural standing. Your spiritual inheritance granting prophetic participation rights in governmental restoration processes. Your choices determine your participation level in prophetic fulfillment. Your engagement affects your community's recognition and authority. Your preparation influences your effectiveness when opportunities for legal recognition become available through treaty systems. September 2nd, 025 is approaching, whether you're ready or not. The question is whether you'll recognize prophetic fulfillment when it manifests through international legal mechanisms. Whether you'll participate in restoration when treaty frameworks make it possible. Whether you'll claim your inheritance when global governance acknowledges Hebrew Israelites' authority. Ancient covenants becoming modern treaties through divine orchestration. Biblical prophecies becoming international law through ungovernance systems. Hebrew Israelites' heritage becoming global authority through legal recognition. The past and future converging in September 2nd, 025 in ways that change everything. But change requires participation. Recognition demands engagement. Restoration needs active involvement rather than passive observation. Prophetic fulfillment happens through human cooperation with divine timing and legal opportunities. September 23rd to 26th, 2025. 4 days that could reshape human governance forever. 4 days when ancient prophecies could become modern reality through international treaty systems. 4 days when your heritage could gain unprecedented recognition through legal frameworks. Are you ready to participate in prophetic fulfillment? Are you prepared to engage with legal systems that could recognize Hebrew Israelites' authority? Are you willing to claim your inheritance when international law makes it possible through treaty recognition? The choice is yours, but the timing is divine. September 2nd, 025 represents prophetic convergence that has been building for millennia. Ancient promises reaching modern fulfillment through international legal mechanisms that acknowledge Hebrew Israelites' heritage and authority. Your DNA, your heritage, your prophetic inheritance, your participation in restoration processes that connect ancient covenants to modern governance systems. Everything converging in September 2nd, 025 through divine timing and human cooperation. September 2nd, 02. The ancient future becomes present reality. Are you ready?